we start with breaking down the spin of Logan Sargent in Q1. It is the last corner, braking zone, and from here we see Logan blocking his front left wheel, which will result in him missing the apex and understeering just a bit towards the outside. So he finds himself in this controversial spot when he doesn't know what to do, to lift off or to try to maintain the throttle. He chooses to stay on the throttle, but he touches the grass just a little bit, and this serrated curb disturbs the car, so it will lose the grip and the car will slide. Now, for me personally, for the second season in a row, the most interesting duel between teammates is Hamilton versus Russell. In terms of pure tempo, it is the closest pair of drivers and also maybe the fastest pair of drivers. So let's compare them. We see here Lewis actually being a bit further down the track, which means that Russell had a better exit out of the final corner towards the fast lap. And here we will see that the shots are synchronized on the start-finish line, and let's proceed. We move towards the first turn, and here we see quite an unusual scenario. Lewis Hamilton starts braking earlier than George Russell. Yes, just a bit, but still it is quite an unusual. Now we go forward, and here we see that Russell's braking was actually shorter. He started braking later, he finished braking earlier, he is already on the throttle, but Lewis managed to bring more speed into the corner, and they are, well, particularly in the same place. Maybe Russell is a bit further forward, but he should have a better exit of the corner. And from here we clearly see that Russell is maybe half a car or maybe a whole car length ahead of Lewis. But we go forward, we go towards the braking zone, and here Lewis has already closed nearly all the gap, which can tell us that Lewis has a lower downforce setup. And here we see quite different techniques of braking. Lewis works simultaneously with two pedals, while Russell's technique looks more like lifting coasting even. Basically, Russell is a very smooth braker, which explains this difference. Now let's move forward. We see them both turning the wheel at exact same moment, but Russell is now a bit ahead of Lewis, so it means that Lewis's turning point is actually earlier than Russell's. They go towards the apex, and we see Russell is again clearly ahead, which means that he was able to carry more speed throughout the whole braking phase. Now, watch the difference in lines. You could clearly see Russell doing a wider lines throughout the corner, while Hamilton lines are more narrower. We are now at this point and we can see this difference. It means that Russell will win in terms of speed, but Lewis will win in terms of shorter distance traveled. So they move towards the exit. Again, we see Russell is able to lift off less than Lewis, also having a bit higher speed, which again proves us that Russell probably had a higher downforce setup. So we go forward, and we see some lagging on the Russell shots, which leads us to quite a ridiculous situation, because Russell was actually quicker on the first sector, but if we will look at the shots, we will see that Hamilton is ahead of Russell. It happened due to some onboards capturing problems, which are quite regular for Albert Park, by the way. I don't know, maybe there is some problem with transmitters down there, but you can always see onboards blurring, lagging on this particular track. So let's synchronize the shots, and we see Russell starts braking from this exact point, but we finally see classical Lewis Hamilton with his late brakings, and the following corner is fast corner with a long straight after it, so theoretically trail braking is not the best option down here. But we saw in previous year Alonso actually doing good in this corner with trail braking, so it is not always the case. And we saw Lewis braking way deeper into the corner, which resulted in him opening the throttle way later. And despite having the same speed, Russell will clearly have a better exit. You see a huge difference in speed, plus difference in downforce will make it easier for George. But Lewis should be able to take back all the gap in speed if he really has a lower downforce setup. Plus we see a slipstream helps Lewis a little bit. And yes, in terms of top speed we see quite a significant difference. But here second sector finishes, we see again Russell winning just a bit, half a tenth of a second, but still winning. And we see both drivers pressing the brakes simultaneously, but Russell is now ahead of Lewis. So again, Russell brakes later, but here it's actually justified because you want to brake later, maximizing the speed from the previous long straight, but the straight after this corner is significantly shorter, so it is not so valuable. So I guess Russell makes a better choice, and here again we see that despite having same speed, Lewis has to lift off the throttle, which again proves us that he should have a lower downforce setup. And I already can make a clear conclusion that Lewis driving is pretty unusual for him. He drives differently, even comparing to himself in the previous season. So I guess he's struggling with his car, and he also admitted it in his post-race interview.
I still feel uncomfortable in the car though, you know, the car's still not, I don't feel connected to it, so I'm driving as best I can with that disconnect, and I'm working as hard as I can to try and create that connect, but I think it's it's a long project.
But we also know Lewis, he has a tendency to complain about his car, so let's just go on. And from here let's synchronize shots again. Now we will track Lewis towards George. You see shots are synchronized. Actually Lewis is situated now more towards the left side of the track. And they approach the braking point, and from here again Lewis brakes later than George. You may see his pedal being already pressed, but I judge braking point by the point where the throttle is left on, not where the brakes are shown as pressed, because as you know F1 telemetry, it will show you this sign even if brakes are pressed on, I don't know, 1%. So yeah, let's go further. And we see them both having the same turning point and actually being at the same place, which means that despite Russell starting braking earlier, he brakes not so heavily and they are already at the same spots. And unlike in the first corner, now Russell is holding his brakes for longer. Lewis is already off the brakes, he is already on the throttle, which is quite impressive considering that he had a lower downforce setup. We see a small correction from George, but he barely even loses anything from this correction. Now this fast corner, again Lewis is able to lift off lesser than Russell, and the whole third sector is better for Lewis, despite this point a huge difference in braking points, which is quite surprising for me. But for some reason Lewis managed not to lose much with braking so early, so I guess at this time his braking was smoother than George's, and he is able to engage on the throttle earlier. Again, we saw difference in lines. Russell was driving wider, but Hamilton's line is actually better. Throughout this corner he is able to clip the curb, he is able to stand on the brakes, he is able to lift off lesser, which means that Russell just missed the turn a little bit and had to lift off more. And they exit the final corner, and we will actually see Lewis winning the last sector, again by a small margin, so the main difference was made here on the first sector, but still pretty close times. Now let's review the race start, and we will watch from Charles on board and Lance's on board. And they start. We see all cars started to go towards inside, and from here we already see George starting his maneuver on Max Verstappen. A bit correction from Lance, but here situation is pretty interesting. Alonso initially tried to go around the outside, but backed off later. Also Lewis was held off by Max in the beginning, but then Max's slipstream allowed him to stay on the third place and later on even attack Max for the second place. And Charles is trying to attack Lance Stroll. From this point they are clearly alongside, but Stroll was ahead of Charles for the whole period, so Charles should definitely know that Stroll is on the right side. Plus we see 3 cars entering the corner side by side, but let's concentrate on Charles and Lance. And here is the contact. Stroll in here couldn't do anything to avoid the crash. He has his teammate completely blocking any sort of maneuver for him, but you also cannot say that Charles was crossing the track or doing some weird maneuvers. He just was not cautious enough. So I guess we can call it a racing incident. But Charles could still be a little bit more cautious because he clearly knew that Stroll is down there. And we see Charles spinning into the gravel and Lance just losing 1 place. Now let's move towards the restart, and an interesting thing happened between Nick De Vries and Esteban Ocon. Let's have a look. So they enter the third corner. We clearly see 2 lines formed, the outside line and the inside line of cars, but from here Nick De Vries already starts to slide away from the inside line towards the outside line. He just understeers, cannot catch any grip, which is quite weird considering that he is on medium and everyone around him is on hards. But let's go further. And we see him just understeering into Esteban. Clearly nothing Ocon could do here, so it is Nick De Vries' fault. We see him flying just over Esteban, and Nick is out of track, which means that he will have to rejoin safely, and he will not be able to do so. We see him pushing Valtteri Bottas off the track completely. And a strange thing that Nicholas was not penalized for both these accidents. Now let's take a break from onboards and review strategy. The whole strategy was dictated by first and second red flags. As I was predicting in the beginning of the weekend, cars were clearly able to do the whole race destination on hards, as was already shown in previous year, and I guess Pirelli should consider this fact and from now on bring 3 softest compounds of tires. Even used hard was able to do nearly all the distance. And the only really interesting thing about strategy is that drivers who decided to stay on hards finished better than those who decided to switch their hards towards mediums during the first red flags. Even we know that De Vries and Sargent got caught up in accident, but they were still starting from the back here. Now, a lot of people were complaining about first red flags, but I guess they were justified, because turn 6, where Alex Albon had a crash, is quite a fast corner, and a damage towards Tech Pro barrier can be dangerous for drivers. Sergio Perez made a spectacular breakthrough from P20 to P5, and despite him being a bit lucky in all the last 4 laps carnage, he had quite a few overtakes under his belt, so let's check them out. The overtake on Kevin Magnussen, it is turn 10, and from this point of view it is pretty non-obvious that you should overtake. Perez is still not in the base of Kevin, and the corner is a fast turn. But it turned out that it is Checo's favorite corner. And he's pulling out this controversial maneuver. Why it is controversial? Ideal racing line here lies somewhere like this. Sergio is already towards the outside of this ideal racing line, which means that he pushes Magnussen quite hardly. Checo just forces Kevin to let him by, and it is a pretty bold move. Yes, technically speaking, he left enough space, so I guess this move is within the rules, but it still looks a bit dirty to me. But the overtake is completed, no one will really complain about it because it's Red Bull overtaking Haas, and let's proceed. Now the maneuver towards Esteban Ocon, the exact same scenario, even in worse case, because now we can see a clear difference between cars on the ideal racing line and between Sergio Perez. But otherwise, the same move. Now, move on Oscar Piastri, and here things will go a bit differently. Oscar actually managed to take the inside, and in this variation I have no problems with the overtake. He took the auto line, he clearly left enough space, so I have no problems with Sergio Perez going wider in this scenario. But I have problems with him going wider when he is on the inside. And the overtake is done. Then he had an overtake on Tsunoda, which is just straight, complete DRS overtake, just running through him on the straight line. And then the same overtake on Lando Norris. And now, finally, different corner, turn 11, overtake on Nico Hülkenberg. Let's have a look. Just take the inside line, Nico never tries to defend this, and it will be actually quite suboptimal for him to losing the time just defending from faster car.
Yeah, keep flipping up.
So Sergio overtakes, no problems for him. Now let's proceed to some bad moves, as I can call them. I consider this type of moves being the main F1 problem of last couple years. Carlos Sainz move on Pierre Gasly. So, they enter braking zone. Gasly on the outside, Sainz on the inside. Sainz switches the lanes, plays this dummy game perfectly, and at these points, no questions for Carlos. He managed to get to the inside, he is clearly in base of Pierre Gasly, but let's carry on. Here, Apex. Again, they're still alongside, no questions for Carlos Sainz. But we move further, and we see Carlos just squeezing Pierre out of the track. Here is the track border. Carlos is clearly out of it, and he was the car on the inside. So Pierre Gasly clearly had no choice. If he remains alongside Carlos Sainz, he's just being pushed in the gravel. If he backs off, like here, he loses a position and he loses a ton of time. Just look at the huge gain that Lance Stroll will have right now. He is already on his gearbox. From my point of view, such a move is unacceptable. But the whole let them race narrative brought us to this point, where such bold moves go by completely unnoticed. Now let's flip the medal and watch some really good moves. Esteban Ocon on Oscar Piastri, again they're approaching turn 9 and 10. They are alongside each other. The whole placement is quite intriguing, because Esteban line should be faster, but for now Oscar is ahead. So let's see how it plays out. And it plays out for Esteban Ocon gaining a position, but the whole fight was quite beautiful. Now, the second restart, the maddest restart in F1 history, at least as far as I can remember, is heavily covered in my shorts video. So if you for some reasons didn't see them, please go to my shorts video and I will have a couple more shorts about this second restart. But here let's break down those episodes that were not included in shorts. And the first episode is Nick De Vries and Logan Sargent. They approach the breaking point and we see a lock up from Logan, and it is actually quite a rookie mistake. Every experienced racing driver knows that when you are in the back of the pack, you should be very cautious approaching the first corner, because you clearly will not be able to take it in a regular racing speed. But here Logan's is too late on his brakes, he tries to engage more, he locks up his fronts and just sweeps Nick De Vries off the track, and of course himself. Yeah, they are both out of the race. Now Sergio Perez found himself in quite a tricky spot. Let's have a look. We see Pierre Gasly locking up, which we have already discussed in shorts. Sergio is left with no place to go. He cannot cross over to the right side, so the only place for him to go is the gravel trap. But the main problem will occur here. This rejoin of the track is beyond unsafe, I would say. Bottas have to not just dodge him, he have to press the brakes even, and again went off completely unnoticed. And we see the Alpine crash, but the interesting thing that in the end Bottas managed to overtake Perez. And Lance Stroll with Carlos Sainz. The first corner, the collision with Alonso, which quite ironically resulted in a catastrophe for Sainz, not for Alonso, but from this shot it's not obvious, but we will discuss it in depth in tomorrow's short video. And now I want to concentrate on Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll is a well-known good starter. Watch his reaction on the whole situation. Just widens his line a little bit and he is able to get past the whole carnage. But there's still a contact down here, and Carlos gets an achievement for contact with two Astons in one corner. But we go further towards the third corner. They are alongside each other and they brake. And from here Lance will unfortunately just outbrake himself. He will lock his tires, Carlos just lets him by, and Lance finishes in the mud. And now the final topic of today's video is Stewards' decision about the whole situation. The first controversial point is red flags. Did we really need them? And I actually support Stewards in those red flags. We had an experience of Abu Dhabi 2021 where victory not in just a race but in the whole championship was basically gifted to Max, which could be avoided if we had red flags. Plus we have an experience of Monza 2022 when everyone was just as mad as on this weekend, but for completely opposite thing. Everyone didn't like race finish under safety car conditions. So as long as stewards will be consistent, I guess it is the best practice to have red flags in the end of the race if we have risk of finishing under safety car conditions or risk of clear undeserved gains for some drivers, like in Abu Dhabi 2021 scenario. So I actually support stewards for bringing red flags. Just make it a consistent practice. And the second controversial point is bringing all the cars back to the lap 56 positions. But here I again support stewards because they finally showed some consistency. We saw a similar scenario in Silverstone 2022 and they have done the same thing. And the final point, you may argue then there was no need to make the 58th lap. Stewards could just call it a day and finish the race. But in this scenario, the final classification will be cars' positions before the mad restart, which will mean that all this multi-million destruction and all those drivers' mistakes were just unnoticed and done for nothing, basically. So at this time I actually support Stewards in every decision made in those last few laps. So this is it, guys. Please leave a like if you liked the video, leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, leave the comment if you want to support the channel, if you want to argue with something. Remember that there is a lot of analysis in shorts video, so if you didn't see them, please have a look, ring the notification bell, and see you soon. Set and go.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey.